so we can put the recording on our website and on our social media for people who aren't able to make it tonight. So I will just go through the ground rules first. If you could mute your mics, that would be great. Thank you, especially when the presenters are speaking, just so there's no feedback or background noise. I know most of Climate Week Northeast events are through Zoom, so if you're not familiar with Teams, if you go up to the very top, there's a little microphone there. If you hover over it, it'll say mute. If you could click on that, that would be great. Thank you very much. If you don't want your video on, there's a little camera icon there. You can click that on or off as well. Also, if you scroll further along, there's a little speech bubble that says show conversation. That will open a chat box down the side of the screen. So we're going to have a question and answer session at the end of our presentations. If you have any burning questions or comments, please feel free to use that chat box there. Okay, and that leads me on to my introduction. So as I said, my name is Tara Murray. I'm the project lead for, I'm going to call it CRA because Climate Ready Aberdeenshire gets to be a little bit of a mouthful when you keep saying it. Our other presenter today is our CRA chair, Sam Long. Sam, do you want to give a wave, say hello? There we go. We also have our vice chair, Kelly Wiltshire, who's with us, and also a member of our steering group. There she is, thank you, Kelly. And also a member of our steering group, Dr Alice Hague, who's joining us as well. And Alice is going to be looking through your comments and your questions as they come in at the side there. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is always the enjoyable first part of the meeting, which is sharing my screen. I do apologise, it's just taking a few seconds there. There we go. So you should all be able to see a PowerPoint now. Can everybody see that? What thumbs up if you can see it? Perfect, that's great. So our two presenters for tonight will be myself, Tara, and our chair, Sam Long, as well. So Climate Ready Aberdeenshire. What is it? Climate Ready Aberdeenshire is a shared vision, strategy and action plan for Aberdeenshire to mitigate climate change and adapt to its impact. So we're made up of a group of people from, sorry, could I ask if you could just mute your mics? That would be great. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit of feedback and background noise. Thank you so much. Yeah, we're a group, a cross-sector group, so we're made up of members of the community, of public sector, private sector, and third sector groups as well. We're working together to see how we can collaboratively meet the challenges of a changing climate within Aberdeenshire. Some of you maybe heard of Climate Ready Clyde. They were kind of like the pioneer for this kind of initiative. They're obviously down in the south of Scotland. They've done a lot of work and we're working alongside them and learning a lot from what they've done. There's also Aberdeen Adapts, which is Aberdeen City's version, and also Highland Adapts is coming along as well. They've just started, so you'll hear more about them later. So what does it mean, this initiative? The difference between us and some of the other initiatives I mentioned there is that those other initiatives are focused almost solely on climate change adaptation, whereas we're looking at mitigation, adaptation and biodiversity. So when we first got together as a group, we were just looking at adaptation, and then we realised you can't actually silo these three things. What impacts on one impacts on another, and a lot of the projects will be joined. And when we spoke to more established groups such as Aberdeen Adapts and Climate Ready Clyde, they said if they'd had the opportunity to start again, they would have focused on all three of those as well. So what do we mean by this? By mitigation, we mean reducing our greenhouse gases in order to slow down or stop climate change. So that's things like renewable energy, circular economy, anything that can reduce our carbon footprint as we head towards our net zero target in 2045. By adaptation, we mean adjusting to the impacts of climate change. So climate change is already here. We can put a lot of work in to slow it down, possibly even stop it, but we can't reverse the impacts of climate change. It's already here and we need to adapt to it and we need to become more resilient to it. So that's why we're looking at adaptation as well. And of course, biodiversity. We're not just going through a climate change crisis, we're going through a biodiversity crisis as well. And we need to remember that when we're thinking about things to mitigate and adapt to climate change, we need to think about the impact that this has on our biodiversity as well. So they're kind of the three strands to Climate Ready Aberdeenshire. So why do we need a strategy? I'm not going to focus on this too long. I'm guessing that if you're all here on a Friday night, it's because you're already quite aware of climate change. You're already quite passionate about it. Scotland's climate is already changing. The world's climate is already changing. Oh, sorry, again, I'm getting a little bit of feedback. If people could just mute their mics, that would be great. Thank you. Yeah, the figures that we have here, they've come from the National Record of Scotland and also Adaptation Scotland, who we're working very closely with. So they've told us the climate projections for the next century will indicate that the trends we've observed over the last century, they're going to continue. It's not going to get much better. We can work to mitigate this and we can work to change this, but these climate change projections are going to happen. Our population is changing across Scotland and Aberdeenshire. Scotland's population was the highest ever in 2018. It's still rising, and Aberdeenshire's population is growing above the Scottish average. So we need to be mindful of that. There's going to be more people in Aberdeenshire who are going to be more impacted by climate change in the region. And then there's the legality. Aberdeenshire Council is a public body. We have to report annually on climate change adaptation progress. So that was really the catalyst for this. And then we realised that instead of just doing the basic, instead of just meeting our legislation, we can really do a substantial piece of work here and really make a difference on the back of that. The Scottish Government is committed to a net zero target by 2045 and reducing our emissions by 75% by 2030. We're working towards that. And most importantly, we're already seeing firsthand the impacts of climate change. You know, it's affecting livelihoods, it's affecting people's homes. Tragically, in the very, not that long ago, it's actually affecting people's lives very, very badly. We need to be doing something about climate change in the region, and that's why we have established Climate Ready Aberdeenshire. So what are our objectives? We want to increase the understanding and awareness of climate change risk and opportunity within Aberdeenshire. So that's not just our understanding and awareness, that's communities, that's businesses, that's councillors, that's basically everybody in Aberdeenshire. We want to increase their understanding and awareness so they know what the issues are and why we need to deal with them. One of our biggest things we're going to do is we're going to work with communities using a place-based approach. I realise that's a very managerial technical term there. What I mean by place-based is we all know Aberdeenshire is absolutely huge, and not one part of Aberdeenshire is any like any other. We all have different infrastructure, different demographics, different populations, and we're all impacted by climate change in very different ways. So we're going to use a place-based approach to look at, not blanket, this will work for the whole of Aberdeenshire, but this will work here and that will work there, and learn from all these areas as well. And working with communities to try and figure out what those are. We're here to support decision makers to make climate friendly and climate ready decisions which support the delivery of local and national commitments and mutually benefit Aberdeenshire's environment, economy and people. Yes, environment is our top priority, but we also need to think about the economy and we also need to think about people. And these things are not three separate entities. They can work alongside and benefit each other. And our fourth objective is we're going to provide knowledge, advice, and support and link businesses, community groups, and individuals to resources, projects, and funding opportunities. So I'll elaborate on this slightly. There's a lot of work going on in Aberdeenshire, from to little grannies out on the beach every Sunday picking up litter to big installations of biomass and renewable energy and everything in between. But the thing is, these people running these projects, they don't often know what projects other people are doing. We want to kind of be the linchpin in the middle of that and bring all these projects together. So we're working on them together, we're learning from each other, we're not duplicating work, and we're sharing experience. That's going to be one of our main objectives. And I've put here funding opportunities. I will emphasise here that Climate Ready Aberdeenshire is not a funding body. Unfortunately, we can't provide funding. However, with the expertise that we have on the steering groups that we are made very aware of funding opportunities that are out there. So we have a website that's under development at the moment. There will be a whole page on that, also through social media, etc. We'll be telling you guys about what funding opportunities are out there. And what we'd like to do in a longer term as well is encourage any community groups or anyone wanting to carry out a project to join together to make joint funding applications for these projects. And that will increase your chances of getting funding and increase the collaboration across the region. Oops, sorry, missed the slide there. There we go, get there eventually. So, who are we? We're made up I'll start from the very beginning. We had 2 engagement workshops, one at the very end of 2019 and one at the start of 2020. We got a lot of people together in that group from across the region, members of public, businesses, private, public sector, you name it, they were there. And we asked them, who do you think can help us create this strategy? They also helped us achieve or devise our objectives as well. And then we reached out to these groups. So the groups that you're seeing on the screen here, there's a representative from each of these organisations on our steering group, on the Climate Ready Aberdeenshire steering group. Kelly, who's with us tonight, she's from Nestrans, and Alice, who's with us tonight, she's from the James Hutton Institute. So you can see, looking at the screen there, we have a really big range of people and a really high level of expertise and knowledge on our steering group. By the way, these slides will also be available on our website as well, if you want to have a look at them. So that is our steering group. I'm not going to spend too much time on governance because it's a Friday night and I don't want to bore you too much with governance, but just to let you know where we've come from and how we've come about, we do have a governance structure in place. So you'll see in the middle there, that's us, the Climate Ready Steering Group. We're sponsored by Aberdeenshire Council, mainly by the Head of Economic Development and Protective Services. They're the ones that really got the ball rolling on this. They're the ones that I also work for as well. We're accountable to the Aberdeenshire Council Sustainability Committee, so any decisions that need made that are going to affect the region, we take those to committee, and that committee is a really good link between the public and between us as well. Underneath us, we'll have some working groups. They haven't been established yet, but we will have some working groups. They'll be responsible for delivering our objectives, where the steering groups are kind of more the strategic direction, Climate Ready Aberdeenshire. And as you can see, there's the project lead there, which kind of covers the whole lot and reports to the project sponsor. And these lovely little photos in the corner here, that's Sam Long, that's our chair, that's me in the middle, project lead, and that's Kelly at the bottom there, just so you can see our lovely little faces and what we look like. And my final slide. So where are we now? Where are we now? We have an annual report. It came out at the start of the year. It's available on our website. It's also available on our social media. We have LinkedIn. We have a Twitter account as well. We're at Abshire on Twitter. And LinkedIn, if you just put in Climate Ready Aberdeenshire, you'll find us. The website address is also huge. So if you just Google Climate Ready Aberdeenshire, you'll find us through this as well. So in the annual report, you'll see everything that we've done over the last year. So the main points here from the report and from the work that we've done, I've put here at the side here. So engagement from the beginning. As I said, we had 2 workshops, one at the end of 2019, one at the end of 2020. We had about 74 attendees at those workshops, which was much higher than we thought it was going to be. We actually expected about 20 to 30, so when that amount of people turned up, it was great. We discussed with them what I've discussed with you, why we need a strategy, why we need to do this, and asked them what it should look like. What should our objectives be? What should our vision be? What people should we have on this group to help us do that? And that's what's helped us form our steering group, our vision, and our objectives. With regards to engagement, our objectives are to work with communities and local businesses. As I spoke about, the idea of sharing funding opportunities and existing projects and knowledge, those ideas came from the workshops as well. We really are wanting to engage and work with you guys on the ground, and we'll continue this engagement as we go along. Collaboration is key to what we do. So despite travel restrictions, we managed to meet with about 28 partner organisations out with our workshops, many of whom are now steering group members. We've also met with, they're not on the steering group, but they are involved, organisations like the NFUS, RSPB, the CPMR North Sea Commission, and of course Climate Week North East as well. They're involved in the work that we do as well. And we're collaborating with Climate Ready Clyde, Aberdeen Adapts, and the upcoming Highland Adapts, and sharing knowledge and best practice through Adaptation Scotland, who I mentioned earlier. They're a Scottish government funded group, and they support public sector organisations in creating these kind of initiatives and strategies. We're also working with them on a small project called Climate Ready Strathdawn. It's in the very early stages. It's going to be like our pilot for Climate Ready Aberdeenshire. If any of you live in that area, please get in touch with me. I'd love to speak to you. We're hoping to get into that area either physically or virtually over the summer holidays as travel allows. But yeah, if you live in that area, please get in touch with me and I'll let you know more about that. Understanding the challenge. To make informed decisions, we need to build our knowledge and evidence base through research and innovation. So that's not just in terms of climate change, but also with regards to community and business engagement as well. To do this, we've supported several research projects, a couple from the University of Aberdeen, one from Edinburgh University, one from James Hutton Institute, which is Alice's project, and one from Cairngorms National Park. So 2 of these have been successful. We're waiting to hear on the rest. The University of Aberdeen are doing one on increasing community participation in a just transition to net zero. They're still in the planning stages of that, but that's a really good looking project. And as I said, our very own Dr Hague, who's here tonight, is doing a place-based climate action in the northeast of Scotland project, trying to seek and understand the opportunities and barriers for place-based climate action within our region. And finally, planning and implementation. We know our climate change journey is going to be long and it's going to be challenging and it's going to require strategic planning and implementation to set out and achieve our vision and objectives and develop our strategy and action plan. That's why we have a steering group, that's why we have a governance structure in place, and we also have a communication plan. We're developing a climate change risk register for the region, and we're setting up our working groups as well. All of this information and more is in our annual report. As I said, it's available on our website. Please have a look at our Twitter page. Please have a look at our LinkedIn as well, or get in touch with me directly and I can send you a copy of this annual report as well. So that is all from me. I'm going to, Alice, unless there's any questions or comments in the chat box you want me to answer just now, I can just pass straight over to Sam. Nope. Okay, perfect. Sam, I pass to you.
Yeah, you know, it's really good opportunity for us to reach out to yourselves. So please do feel free to use the chat function in Teams to start, you know, raising comments or asking queries. So Tara, somebody has already asked. They can't find a copy of the annual report, so I think Alice is off. Alice is like me, has gone off to see if she can find it in the meantime. I'll pick up the slides and carry on talking in the meantime. I think Tara's done a really good job of setting context of where we are. And would like to give a little bit more view of where we're going to. This is meant to be a dialogue, so although we've got formal Q&A at the end, if it's really desperate, do jump in and ask a question as we're going. I'd like to probably pull some strands together and make it feel well. There's going to be some big things we need to address that are going to be relevant from 2020, right, in particular. So let me get going. So there's a short piece, a medium piece, and a long-term view of what can we do as climate ready and what do we need to do. Tara, go and so these are animated slides, so I'm going to very politely ask Tara to keep me animated. Let's move. Short term. So clearly the elephant in the room, if I can use that phrase, is COVID-19. We'll all be aware that this would have been a completely different conversation. We might be, I don't know, we might be in town. We might have held this conversation in person rather than over Teams. That said, we all know that there's a carbon upside to us doing this remotely. So COVID-19 has had a short-term impact. It pretty much wiped out what we would have achieved in 2020 in terms of community engagement and reaching out to people. There's also the post-COVID element of impact that's both a positive and a negative. I think you'll all, if you're keen enough to give up your Friday evening, whether it be with a beer or not with a beer, then to attend this session, then we'll all probably be aware that post-COVID impact is twofold. There's one side there that we may see some form of green recovery, be that from Scottish government or UK government or local level. There is talk about that kind of green financing and green initiatives. Now, it's too early to see whether that will have a material impact, but that could be the upside of COVID. The downside is the constraints on the finance. As Tara said earlier, we are primarily reliant on the council for sponsorship. We get Tara's time paid for by the council, but Kelly and I give up our time voluntarily. Steering group members like Alice are doing the same. That means what can we achieve as a group? And so that's probably what we need to impart to you all is we've got lots of little pockets of exercise. We probably need to bring them all together. So what we're trying to do this year, and it'll probably was meant to be a 2020 deliverable, it'll be something we work in 21, is landing the roadmap. And that's a macro scale roadmap for everybody. I'm quite keen that the council is forced to deliver some form of thought leadership here, right? They have services. We were talking to the risk management team today about how do they build climate into risk. Again, some of these things are going on, but in the broader community, we may not be aware of them. And maybe we need to bring them into decision making at community level. Maybe we need to be talking to our employers or to our employees. But the idea is that we need to start getting a greater vision of what may happen, what we can do to counter it, and the routes forward. So initial short-term piece is really about COVID-19 recovery. Next, please, Tara. In the medium term, working up into the 2030 period, really keen to pull together public, private and third-party engagement, make sure that every sector has an awareness of what's really going to be achieved. The more time I spend working with Tara and Kelly and Alice and the others, the more you realize just how big this is going to be. This is a multi-generational challenge. It is. We all know that. If you're on the call, then you're probably well aware of the risks that we're talking about. So got to make sure we tick all those sectors. And so there's this piece about accelerating what we're doing and engaging all the sectors. And then I'm really keen on the notion of generational shift. So we need to be thinking about, is education bringing this through? And are we, how far are we reaching through in terms of what our children are going to be doing in 20 years' time should be radically different from what we may be doing right now. And then here's the long-term challenge. And I think if there's any questions tonight, I'm not going to be surprised if you ask us about these things. How do we get to meaningful action, right? It's got to be about the adaptation piece and the mitigation. How do we do that at region scale? I'm not going to pretend to say that we know all the answers and we've got them all for you and we just need to publish a document. It would be false to say that. Okay. So the idea here is about joining the dots, and I think many of you here on the call are the dots that we need to join. And so thank you for coming along this evening to have this conversation. You can read that as well as I can. The point here is community, taxpayers, residences, businesses, they all need to be, those pockets of either strength or weakness in terms of climate adaptation and climate mitigation need to be brought together. If you look for what's kind of going on in the background, though, there's this issue about systemic thinking. There's loads of little initiatives going on, but they're very distributed. And so our role is very much about trying to coordinate things, bringing them together, but actually how do we reach a broader, how do we establish more impact? So the community groups are clearly going to be really important to moving forward. Agencies, these guys there's a lot of work going on in the likes of SEPA and others. But again, it's quite hard to make that. If you've got a little team of expert and a little team of expert, how do we make sure that that is having an impact into the region? And then I'm really keen, as I work in the private sector, I work in the oil and gas myself, really keen on making sure that we bring business into what's going on. They shouldn't see this themselves as separate to this debate. And we can talk about this later. But if you're involved in the energy sector or you're involved in oil and gas, you'll be aware of the discussion around energy transition. That's a very challenging topic for the Northeast. It's where economy meets environment meets employment. And that's an added twist that the likes of Climate Ready Clyde or others aren't going to deal with. We have a wealth base in the Northeast that's been derived out of oil and gas. That industry is now going to enter a period of eventual decline and replacement. And that could create some interesting socioeconomic outcomes in the Northeast. Next. So there's this piece about how do we as CRA and yourselves and the people we live and work with, how do we move the needle? How do we make that change at work, at home, and what we do in our pleasure? And you know that already. So moving on. I'm going to guess a fair few of you in the audience have either ordered or are aware of or will have seen news articles talking about Bill Gates's latest book. This is a very philanthropic view of the world. I have a friend who works in malaria research for Bill Gates in a kind of Thai-Burma border. So she works for his malaria foundation, which he's been funding for something like 20 years. His work in COVID is drawn across that, and now he says what he's doing in COVID is nothing in comparison to what he's going to be doing in climate. So there are some serious people out there who are saying we've got to get on with this. So there's a couple of quotes out of him here. His piece here about being multifaceted and the impacts that come from that, just because we all acknowledge that climate change is going to have an impact on us doesn't make it any easier to deal with. And that's very strongly related to the energy transition. Many people may know that they're currently driving around in a hydrocarbon-driven vehicle. They may not know what they're going to do about that and how they can afford to do anything about it. And then I quite like this one because I think it really talks to what we're trying to do with CRA. There's going to be no one solution. It doesn't matter whether it comes from Holyrood or whether it comes from Westminster. No piece of policy, no investment strategy from those guys is going to solve it all, right? So everybody is going to have to chip in some way or other. And so, but the counter to that is it can't just all be carrot. It has to be stick, and there has to be benefit between the two. So we get this needs to benefit everybody. It cannot just benefit a certain class of individual or a certain economic form of activity. Good. Okay. So one of the things we'd just like to test with you all is we'd quite like to see an awareness raising piece here that's really about personification. So instead of us just writing a strategy and saying, this is what we're going to do about climate change in Aberdeen, and this is what it's going to take to be fully adapted, and this is what you need to do for mitigation. We'd like to try and make that apply to individuals in the community so that we can increase their buy-in. So it would be messaging around what do you do right now? What is your job, or how do you live, or where do you live? And think about how that might be different in 20 years' time. So these are random samples. I'm just testing this with yourselves as notions. So on the left, into a student group, what is the future skill set that students need to be studying? You go and check. Many of the traditional oil and gas engineering degrees and masters have stopped because there's not a foreseeable need for them in the future. Okay, those are stopped, but what are we replacing them with? And students, will you be going to university, or will you be studying from? Does it matter what academic institute you choose? Because you may well be studying from home. If you're in tourism and you own a B&B, how are your individuals going to get to your house? If you're on the North Coast 500 route up beyond Inverness, are you really going to have a bunch of Ferraris driving around, spending all that money and coming to visit your house anymore, or is that going to change? Are the seasons going to change? Are people going to be here at different time periods from when they have been historically? Is your building ready for the increased heat and the heavier rain? And you can see where I'm going with this one. So the other one here is fishermen. We have members of the steering group who are specialists from Marine Scotland. They'll talk to you already about species migration that's ongoing. And is there a dietary shift coming for those of us who buy fish and eat fish? And what are the protected areas going to look like? I can move on. I've got 3 more examples to talk through. If, like me, you work in oil and gas, what do we do about the fact that we need to carry on oil and gas production, but we also need to start replacing it? How do we deal with that economically and technically? And then what is the reskilling that is needed to make the most of that piece? If you're lucky enough to have retired into the Northeast and so on, and you currently like playing golf or whatever it is that you want to do with your time, are those same activities and is that same pattern of employment and retirement going to be applicable in 20 years' time? What is going to be the impact on the pension funds? What is your willingness to change if you think you've put money away and you want to do one thing and then you actually find that you can't do it in the future? And then finally, probably one of the big ones for us in the Northeast anyhow is going to be landowners and land use. Afforestation, peatland restoration are going to be the 2 biggest hits we can do on for both mitigation and for adaptation to some degree. So we've got that piece. We've got NFU, our part of the steering group. They're aware of what we're doing. So what we're proposing, and I'd like to sound out to you all, is does that work as a means of communicating? Because the most important thing we have to do is get people's awareness up across all sectors of the community. It can't just be those people who've turned up to today's call. So is that a logical way forward for us as an organization? I think when we get to Q&A, we'd like to get some form of understanding of whether you think that's enough or whether you're expecting more from us. In the meantime, I'll hand back to Tara to kind of wrap up.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, I think Sam's brought us neatly to, this is our very basic route map. So as I said, we started in 2020. We were slowed down a little bit in 2020, as was everybody in the entire planet by the COVID-19 pandemic. What did come out of that, though, the silver lining, is the talk about a UK Green Recovery Programme. There's been a lot of talk of that over last year and into this year as well. So this is the route map here, you know, you've got the quarters of the year and stuff like that. So the first half of last year, we're working on establishing ourselves. That was our, you know, our governance and all that. Then we worked on our collaboration, the second part of the year. In 2021, we're really going to look at the development of the strategy, and that's the things that Sam spoke about in his earlier slide there. There's Climate Ready Strathdown as well. I know somebody's put a question in the chat box about that. I can tell you a lot more about that at the end of this. We've also got COP26 at the end this year as well. We are hoping to be part of COP26, Adaptation Scotland, who I mentioned earlier. We work very closely with them. They're going to be part of COP26. They're not sure how, if it's a virtual stall, a physical stall, we don't know yet, but they are going to be part of that. And what we're hoping to do is tie in with the work that they're doing to showcase the work that we're doing at COP26 as well. So we are, fingers crossed, going to be part of that this year. Even if you're not part of the actual event though, there's still lots of things that we're going to be doing in the run up to it, both as Climate Ready Aberdeenshire and also Aberdeenshire Council as well in the run up to that. We're hoping to have our draft strategy out in the first quarter of 2022. That'll be out to the public for consultation, so we can get the final strategy done at the end of 2022, and then we're into that long term that Sam was talking about there, the really implementing the actions that come out of that and the long term deliveries of those right through to 2045. So although it's Climate Ready Aberdeenshire 2020-2030, we are aware that, as Sam said, this is a massive piece of work with lots of people involved, and it is going to have huge long term impacts. So this is where we come on to the question and answer session. You'll see at the bottom there. You can contact me, tara.murray@aberdeenshire.gov.uk. There's also our Abshire email address as well. That's the hashtag that we use for social media, and that's our Twitter as well. As I said, we're on LinkedIn and we have a web page. Now, somebody asked about a full website in the chat as well. I believe I saw that. We're actually working on that at the moment. So as I said, we have a hosted web page that's on Aberdeenshire Council. We're working on a full website that'll help us achieve a lot of our objectives that talking about, the sharing of projects, the sharing of funding opportunities. We actually have a student at the University of Aberdeenshire, so used to saying it, at the University of Aberdeen, who's helping us create that website as well. So as soon as that is up and running, I will let you know. We're also going to have newsletters that you can sign up for. They'll come out bi-monthly, maybe quarterly. We can email those out to people and keep an eye on our social media for those kind of things as well. So now we can dive straight into the question and answer session. Alice, do you want to go through some of the questions that came up in the chat first that I've maybe missed, and then we can take some verbal questions? How does that sound?
Sure. I think that the first one was from Matt asking about the Climate Ready Strathdawn and the objectives for that.
Yes, I did say I would come back to that. This is very exciting. I'm very excited about this small project. I say small, it's small, but it's very important. So we've got a small pot of funding. I say we're not a funding group because we're not, we have to seek funding as well. We have a small pot of money from Adaptation Scotland, and they're helping us run out a project in Strathdawn. So we had to apply for that. We had to pick a locality in Aberdeenshire that we felt was impacted by climate change, so that wasn't difficult, where we thought the community would be willing to work with us. They were aware of climate change. They were already doing work in climate change, which Strathdawn is. They are very impacted by it. You look at the ski centre in that area as well. They've been impacted by flooding. And an area that maybe doesn't get as maybe much attention as other areas of Aberdeenshire. So that is why we've picked the Strathdawn area. I'm working with the area manager there as well, who knows the area extremely well. And what we're planning to do is a place-based project. We're going to get in there, we're going to speak to the people of that, within that area, of that locality. If anyone lives in Strathdawn, by the way, you'll know that there's a spa in the middle of Strathdawn, which seems to be the be-all and end-all of Strathdawn. Every time I speak to somebody about Strathdawn, they talk about the spa right in the middle of it. So we are going to be involved with the spa as well in Strathdawn, because it's very, very important. We're going to be speaking to the people who live in that area. We're going to be asking them, how are you impacted by climate change? What are you doing so far? And how can we help you achieve your aims? And get them to be thinking about climate change adaptation and mitigation in their long-term decision making as well. We're in the very early stages of that at the moment. We're kind of like in the stakeholder mapping stage. So we have a list of people we're going to contact. That includes some very prominent figures in the community and also some councillors as well. We're hoping to meet with them about May time, I think. So we're still in the planning stages of it. If anyone lives in that area or wants more information about it, I'm not going to go on too much about it tonight. Please feel free to get in touch with me directly, and I can give you a lot more details. If you want to be involved, that would be great as well. Okay, Alice, anything else?
So there's a question come in, which you'll probably see there, about how does Climate Ready Aberdeenshire tie with Aberdeen City?
So Aberdeen City already have Aberdeen Adapts. They did that a few years ago. Aberdeen Adapts is solely focused on adaptation. We're doing adaptation and climate change. We actually work very closely. So our sustainability and climate change team within the Shire Council works very close with the city team. We meet regularly. We're very aware of what each other's doing. We do work with each other on a kind of ground level, if you like. We are aware that whatever our strategy looks like, it's going to have to tie in with the work that Aberdeen City have already done. We're not expecting them to change what they've already achieved and what their objectives are. So we're very conscious of that. We're going to be working very closely with Aberdeen City. We're also going to be working closely with Highland as well, because geographically our areas are very close. Yeah, absolutely, it does tie in with what Aberdeen are doing. We do work very closely in our climate change initiatives.
Can I just add on that a bit, Tara? So I was talking to the city team this week actually, and one of the things that I'm also interested in is the energy transition zone. Many of you will have heard that there was 27 million of funding proposed for that. Clearly, that funding isn't meant to just benefit the city, right? It may well be spent geographically on facilities inside the city, but that isn't just meant to stimulate and create jobs that are only within that boundary. We all know that anything that goes on in town tends to permeate out into the Shire as well. So there is, Tara's absolutely right. It's quite difficult politically to tie the two together because they are run under different administrations. And Tara is an officer of the council, and I am an independent chair, or Kelly and I are independent chairs. So there are differences between how we can relate to the two. Ultimately, the goal is to make sure that the city and region align. City and Shire are aligned, so we get this region view. I think it may take time. In the conversation I was having this week, I think the consensus was you need to get the ball rolling. There's such an urgency to deal with these issues that actually we probably don't have time to make sure it's all absolutely joined up and then roll on it. It's easier. There's so much pressure legally on the local authorities to take action that I think hanging around to join up the dots will slow them down. They will miss their targets. There's a long-winded answer for you there.
Thank you. Tara, I wonder if you want to take the PowerPoint off so that we can get kind of big pictures again, because we're all very tiny. And then while you're doing that, Malcolm Rooney, do you want to ask make your comment directly?
Hi, I'm quite happy to. I listen to a lot of people talking about the approach to climate change, and it seems to me that folk are very good about talking about the top-down approach, what organisations can do. And I talk to Rotary clubs from the Forth to Shetland about climate change and environmental sustainability. I think the key lies in A, individual action, people taking personal responsibility and doing what they can, B, being positive about it and picking up on what Barack Obama said when he won the election. Yes, we can. We can do something about this. Rotary has almost eradicated polio. Don't listen to what Bill Gates says. Rotary has been a huge player in the eradication of polio. If we can do that, we can make a huge impact on climate change. Thanks.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. We hear a lot of talk about strategy and policy, but it is individual actions. You're absolutely right. And that's one of the objectives we're trying to achieve as well. That's how we're trying to get in there into the community and talk to individuals, get that understanding, get that awareness, and ask them what they think they can do and how we can help them do it. So I think you're absolutely right. Sam, you were to say something, sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, gosh, if you use my hand, that would be the right polite thing to do, either the electronic one or the real one. Malcolm, I was going to return the question back to you. Does it sound like our message feels top down?
To be honest, what I've heard tonight, yes. I would think that, if I'm being honest, 90% of what was said was top down. That was the impression I got. I apologise if I'm wrong. I think it's the other way around, to be honest, that we really need to get grandparents to look at their grandchildren and wonder what kind of world they will inherit in 2100, and so on. Listen, by the way, guys, I live in Kirriemuir, so I'm an interloper. I apologise.
Malcolm, what I would say back to you is we need 200,000 people to feel like you do, right? Most of these people on this call tonight, I think, are going to share your values and your opinions. And I do not want us to come across as being top down in any way at all, because it's not going to work, right? Forget what happens in Whitehall. No, don't forget what happens in Whitehall and what happens in Hollywood. Actually, unfortunately, is going to be very strong determinants in whether we're successful or not. But until every single person in the world realizes that the way that they currently live is not going to be the same in 20 years' time, that's the scale of what we've got to take on here. I spend a lot of time in the oil and gas industry talking to people about this and explaining to them we have a long way to go, people. A great presentation I used to do, Malcolm, we will move on, I promise, is I used to sit down and explain to people that the UK oil and gas upstream industry offshore is only 3% of UK emissions, right? It's going to cost £5 billion to stop that industry emitting. Okay, to get to net zero emissions, £5 billion just to take the oil and gas industry. If every single individual who worked in the oil and gas industry went home, changed their boiler and changed their car, we're likely to have a bigger net impact than spending £5 billion changing the upstream industry. So if we don't make it work at home, I'm going to shut up. Our goal is not to be top down, I promise you. And we need you guys to help us make that happen.
My Rotary talk is entitled The Power of One.
Okay,
absolutely. I see Charlie Allen has his hand up there. Charlie.
Yes, hello, thanks very much. I'm just, I was interested to hear the comment about multi-generational education, and that demands culture change. And one of the things I didn't see on your chart showing all your partners was the schools and education department. I know you had the council, but I didn't see anything that's specifically about the schools. So if you really want a long-term sort of answer to this, then to me, I think you need to be engaging schools now and bringing them on board. I think Malcolm mentioned about the grandchildren being included and making sure they know what their part to play is. And I think that's very crucial if you're thinking long term. Lots of short term stuff, we're hearing that all the time, but long term is culture change, and that means today's children. Thank you.
Sam, do you want to respond to that? Because I know you are very passionate about involving schools and young people in this. Sam talks about this a lot, by the way.
Charlie, I'm going to answer your question, because I make people like Tara's life quite difficult, because I'm an independent chair and I'm not a council employee. Then I can annoy Tara and her directors by saying to her, I want to know what's going on in education. I've had a word with the chief executive when we got up and running, when Kelly and I were appointed last year, and we've talked about CRA sponsored by the council, but the role of CRA and the chairs of CRA between Kelly and I is, if we need to, we're going to go along and prod the council and say we need you to do more. Now, the formal answer to your question is it's already built into the curricula. The curricula is determined by Holyrood. It's not determined by local or council. And then there's the Green Schools Initiative. So this is technically already baked in. Whether it's baked in enough and whether it's really got enough legs to it yet, I'm not convinced. But the technical answer from the education team is we already do this. So it may be up to us as a community, a cross-representative community, go away and ask our children, go and ask, others. Matt, feel free to chip in.
You're on mute. Yeah, so I'm here tonight representing a community group, which we've called Zero Carbon Daviot. Ken, who's here, is also in the group. And yeah, I mean, just talking about schools, one of the issues we found reaching out to the rest of our community is that we've found that the school, so Keep Scotland Beautiful run climate literacy and the Eco Schools programme. And so all the schools are supposed to have an Eco School coordinator, but resources are such that when the Eco School coordinator left, they haven't been replaced. And as such, the programme's come to an end. And one of the parents actually volunteered to take that role on, but the head wasn't keen, said it needed to be a member of staff. So I think that's just one issue I'd highlight in terms of how we would like organisations like groups like yourself to help out. Other than that, if I may, a sort of point of general feedback in terms of you were asking about, you know, the timeline that you've laid out and so on, and we're lucky enough that Ken was able to be an observer on the Scottish Climate Assembly that's taken place recently. And I've done a lot of my own research into climate change and so on, but some of the key facts that were presented at the Climate Assembly by the Tyndall Institute were that Scotland's emissions, our current emissions rates, we only have 9 years left before we consume our fair carbon budget. You know, so we really are kind of taking the standpoint that 2045 is too late, and we're, as a community, trying to set ambitious targets to basically try and decarbonise our village by 2030 if we can, because I don't think you can be too ambitious. So as a kind of point of feedback, I guess that's what I'd say is all the stuff I hear is that you can't be ambitious enough, really. So I think that's where you know, we'd like to definitely engage with yourselves, and quite like just being totally honest. I find it a little bit disappointing that like you're not part of the council, and you know it's not the actual council themselves. I mean, it's absolutely great that they've got you guys got this task force together. But my other kind of question is, how much kind of clout do you think you'll have? I mean, you're going to develop a plan for the council. Are they committed to following it and that sort of thing? Sorry, thanks.
There's so many things I could come back on. I've just typed into the chat that I'm quite happy for us to roll on beyond 8 if needs be. Okay, at some point I'm going to want a Guinness and I'm going to want my tea, but I don't mind if we roll on a little bit, because we haven't had a chance to have a dialogue with the community, and so we would be keen. I'll answer quickly, conscious that some have put their hands up as well and we've got other questions to address. I think eco schools, that's really good feedback, Matt. I'm quite happy to pick that up and run with it. I know that from my wife's ex-KSB, she got that program up and running through somehow herself. I'm aware of it. Eco schools, I know what that looked like. My own children have done some of it, but it's really interesting to hear that. But that probably brings me neatly to your point about the council. We had a conversation today with the relevant officers about risk management. Now, the council are doing what is legally obliged of them within their own services and within their own functions. That is not a part of CRA. The reason CRA exists is carved out from that, is to do the community wider piece. So let's take it that the Shire, they have their own carbon budget. They are trying, you know, it is. Can you imagine how difficult that is? Because the council's remit's pretty big, and guess what? Their funding's not exactly great at the moment. If there is one thing, there is funding available for climate stuff at the moment, and we should act on that. The 9 years left for the carbon budget and being ambitious, Gates is all over that. He says you have to think big and you have to be going now, and I would fundamentally agree with all those pieces. Can't be ambitious enough. That's okay. If you read the Climate Change Commission report from Net Zero and last year and the 6th annual carbon budget, we've seen Chris Clark, Tara and I were at a dinner, virtual dinner at the beginning of the year where Chris Clark presented. Chris Clark is chair. He's Glaswegian. He's Scottish. He knows the area well, right? Chris Clark made it. We've got some slides actually. Could potentially drag them up and show you here. Chris Clark is head of advising the government, regardless of politics, what should happen with carbon and what the budget looks like. I'm sure you know that. His comment is people are not aware of asset life cycles. If you're changing out a boiler, it's got a 15-year life cycle. If you're changing out your car, it's got a 10-year life cycle. People have to start realizing that the decisions they're making now that they think of 20 years away are actually are asset decisions now. And he's got this great chart where he shows assets that people are buying right now will probably fall off a cliff because they're not designed for the future. So I think your piece about 9 years probably is closer. It's really hard to go faster than we are, and I don't think we're achieving enough. I'm sure Tara might admit that. Tara, you're paid to do this stuff. You tell me how you feel about that.
No, I absolutely agree, and thank you for throwing me under the bus in front of all these people, Sam. Thanks very much. No, I absolutely agree with that. You said what you said is absolutely right. We're a huge organisation. We've got a lot of responsibilities. Our budget isn't as good as it can be, especially over the last year. If you speak to individuals in leadership positions and some of our elected members as well, there is a lot of passion in the council for climate change, for sustainability, environment. I'm not just saying that because I work there, there genuinely is. That's why I've chosen to work there, because I'm passionate about climate change myself. So there is a lot there. Maybe not doing as much as we'd like to, but we are doing the best that we can. I did make a note of your comment about the eco schools, because I sit on the Education and Children's Services sustainability strategy. They're creating a new strategy for the whole of Education and Children's Services, looking at sustainability across the whole service. So I've made a note there, particularly of the fact that a parent volunteered and was told no, it has to be a teacher, because I know they're struggling to get the eco schools going because the teachers just don't have time, and it often relies on individuals having that passion within the school to do it, to get it up and running. So I've made a note of that. That's really good feedback, and this is why I love speaking to people from the community and getting that feedback. So thank you, Matt.
Can I point us back to, there's a couple of questions from earlier. One from Ian Morris about hydrogen. Maybe you can ask that. And then actually one of the councillors, Elizabeth Davidson, has got a question about what does a green recovery really mean. But Ian Morris, I don't know if you're still here, if you want to ask your question about hydrogen.
I'm still here. I don't see myself, but I'm still here.
Okay.
Yeah, no. I think some of the discussion that's ongoing is more relevant. I just heard that there was this plan, seemed to be very integrated up in the Highlands, of producing green hydrogen to feed the distilleries. I thought that was very, very integrated thinking. But no, I'm certainly picking up from Malcolm Rooney's comment about bottom up. The efforts being done in the David region. I know here in Newborough, where I am, there are groups of individuals who are getting on with what they want to do. I'm not sure personally what it's about. I've just been invited to join a future meeting, and I think there's an awful lot we can all learn from each other at ground level. I personally have I've been 2 months an electric car owner, and I realised that one thing I could do is to share my experience with everybody else. Something I just thought of this afternoon, and that's been reinforced by this evening's chat. So please ignore my question. It's far too high level and for the future. But as an engineer, I'm always thinking of these things. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to, Tara, am I going to do my usual bit where I get very excited about hydrogen and all that other stuff?
I thought you might. I thought Sam will be all over this. Yep.
Okay, so the audience here has to make sure you have to slow me down if I'm going too fast or I'm giving you too much here, right? Or we're going too late. So again, Alice's job is to say to me, Sam, you're dragging on too long and we've got other things to discuss. I'd like to talk about the hydrogen piece because I think it's very important that people understand what's going on here and that you decide where you want to sit and what voice you want to have. There is much to be said. I have an 11-year-old mopping the floor next to me at the same time that I'm doing this, by the way. So if you see a mop randomly appear, that's what's going on. He's put me off completely. Hydrogen. Okay, so yes, the distilleries, if you think about it, they are typically large gas boilers or large oil boilers. So there is green recovery funding, which will very nicely take us to Councillor Davidson's question. There is green recovery funding for the distilleries that is looking into can they go down a hydrogen path and then be generating green output, right? It doesn't have to be whiskey, whatever it is. I can understand that, but one of my concerns is that a headlong rush towards hydrogen to be the next solution is actually not a particularly wise decision. There are some serious technical, economical, and engineering considerations to be made about whether we're going to push on any of these things like hydrogen or not, right? Hydrogen, many people assume I can take the existing gas network, change the boiler, change the burner piece in my boiler, do some others, and hydrogen will solve my problems. The problem with hydrogen is you have to generate it in the first place, right? If we use electricity to generate enough hydrogen for what we need, you're going to have 5 times as much wind power generation as you've currently got just to produce the hydrogen. It's a very inefficient means of doing basic things. It's suited for steel making. It might be suited for trains. It might be suited for haulage. It is unlikely to really prove itself as a vehicular answer, and it's unlikely, I suspect, to end up in your boiler. However, I'm not paid to make that decision. I'm not an economist, and I'm not a hydrogen or a process engineer. So as a society, we're going to have to decide whether we want these things or not. People like Pale Blue Dot, who are building the facilities at St Fergus, they are going to build a carbon capture plant, which will capture plant from gas treatment from as you may know, St Fergus treats about 13% of the UK's gas, right? A lot of us in the Aberdeenshire region don't benefit from it because we're not on the gas mains connection. It gets pumped elsewhere. But St Fergus generates, I can't remember what the number is, 6% of Scotland's CO2. It's a relatively small emitter, but because it's got connections going back offshore to a suitable reservoir, they're going to do carbon capture and storage. That team, I know them, I've known them for many years. They're a lovely team, and they've got the environment at their heart. That's what they're really aiming to do. They're also planning to build a hydrogen plant. But their argument is, if we don't give hydrogen a go, then we're not trying. It kind of goes back to Matt's point about if you're not adventurous, you don't give it a go. So the city have also backed hydrogen. They're the ones who they've just put £8 million worth of hydrogen buses in town. They've had a hydrogen bus since 2015. The city are going to give hydrogen a go. The reason I've gone into it in great detail is I just want the more people who engage in this discussion, the more people who are asking questions about whether it's right or whether it's wrong. Please do not hear people tell you that hydrogen is the answer, because there is no fixed answer. Do not take it just a top down here for Malcolm piece. If you hear people tell you hydrogen is a fixed thing and it's the answer, ask them why. Ask them about the thermodynamics. Ask them, is it really worth it? Sorry, that's my high horse. I'll get back off it.
No, that's okay. Just to add to that, as part of one of the Aberdeen Climate Action Cafes, they have a speaker coming along from the University of Aberdeen who knows a lot about hydrogen from a research point of view. It's on Aberdeen University's website already. If you're into hydrogen and want to know about it, I really suggest you listen to his 1-hour webinar. It's fascinating. I really enjoyed it. So it's on the University of Aberdeen events website, and I believe he's going to speak at one of Aberdeen Climate Action Cafes as well. It's very good. So just to add that in there. Someone had their hand up for ages. I think it was Anne, but I think her hand. Oh no, Anne, your hand's still up there. Because I know you've had your hand up for a while. Anne Gordon. You're on mute, Anne. You're not on mute, but I still can't hear you for some reason. What I'll do is we'll go to Ken and then we'll come back to you, Anne, if that's okay.
Chat?
Yeah, or type it into the chat.
They've already typed it in. Is there a possibility, or maybe it exists, of an online resource to see what's being done around Aberdeenshire?
Yes. Now, this is another collaboration that we're doing with Aberdeen University. One of their master's students is about to start a mapping exercise. They'll be starting it in May, I believe, as part of their master's. And their job is to map the work that's already being done across Aberdeenshire, both privately and public sector as well. That's going to be on our website. Ideally, I'd like to have a physical map with all the pinpoints in it of what the projects are, if it's an adaptation, if it's a mitigation, if it's a bit of both. So yes, we are doing work into that to map the work that's already going, because I think we need to know what's already out there before we can decide what else needs to be done. So yeah, thank you, Anne, for reminding me to bring that up. Thank you.
And then there was a question from Ken Gordon, who got his hand up.
Yeah, hello. Yes, thank you very much. What I just wanted to do was to say, thanks very much for inviting us to this group, and it's good to hear what you're embarking upon. What we have found in our small community of Daviot is that we need to look at things holistically. For example, we would like to improve our housing stock in terms of its of the insulation, but you can't just do insulation in isolation. You need to look at the entire home. And the same thing really goes for the Shire, because, Sam mentioned there some good work being done at distilleries, but we're also involving our friends in the farming sector. And, I was told, well, you know, that's great what you're doing on climate change, but, you know, be careful of unintended consequences. I used to buy draff from the distilleries to feed my livestock, and they are now using it to create energy for themselves. And so to fill in the gap, I have to import soya. So, you know, we just really need to have joined up thinking. And it's great that this group is here, and hopefully we can achieve that together.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. And soya is one of those things that seems to come up in conversations a lot, particularly about milk and about that. I've had many conversations with people about what's the most environmentally and sustainability version of milk, and soya is one of those things. So that's an excellent example. And you're right, and that's why I was talking about the mitigation, adaptation, and biodiversity, because what you do to help one can have a negative impact on the other. So we need to not look at things in silo and actually have this joined up approach. So yeah, thanks, Ken. I see there's someone at the bottom there with their hand up. Oh, it's Isabel. Isabel, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here, thank you. And I'll put my video on, although I can't see me. So I'm councillor in Aberdeenshire, and I'm also vice chair, of the Sustainability Subcommittee, and I am on the North Sea Commission Environment Group, where we share, and with Tara, where we share international information about climate, addressing the climate problems. And I think it's really interesting, and I do think this group is to an extent top down, but there's all these other groups that are bottom up. So I went to the Newborough Climate Action Group last night. I go to Sea Change in Colliston when I can. So, and I don't think there's any harm in having work done from both directions. So, but as a councillor, I do push climate change and the environment down people's throats all the time. You know, so right now, the directors, we're looking at doing things differently, and there's directorate plans. Each part of the council has a directorate plan, and they're not including climate change nearly enough. And I've said that it has to be right through the whole thing. Climate change and equalities should be there, just a thread through everything that we do. And it's about complete culture change in the council, and about considering what impact the actions we take every time we do something. And I'm going to keep banging on, so hopefully I'll get elected again next year so that I can bang on about it for another year. And frankly, I'm going to embarrass people into it.
Thank you, Isabel. See, I told you there were elected members out there who are very passionate in fighting the corner, and Isabel is definitely one of them. Thank you. I see some hands that are still up here. I'm not sure if they're old hands or if they're new hands. So if you've asked a question and you're not asking another one, if you could take your hand down, and that way we'll know who's still needing to ask. That'd be great. Okay, I see Ian and Anne, you both still have your hands up. Ian, do you have another question or comment?
No, sorry,
No.
do I have my hand up? I can't
No,
see.
okay.
All right.
And, okay, and Anne's is gone as well. Perfect, thank you. Alice, was there any other comments on the chat box?
Not in the chat box. I just wondered, Sam posed the question about these ideas of stories, of telling, you know, thinking about different characters, different people, and essentially telling the story of climate change and potentially climate adaptation through our lives. And we said we'd have a kind of discussion around that if people are still, would, you know, welcome some conversation about that, if there's any thoughts or input. Feel free to unmute yourself.
I'm thinking maybe people are thinking, Isaf. Oh no, wait, Matt's going to say something, I think.
I'd just say, yeah, it sounds like a great idea, because I mean, for me, you know, I've been signing all these petitions online and all these sorts of things, but the most empowering thing and the biggest difference I think you can make is in your own community. You know, go local. And you never, you know, I didn't think really I'd get anywhere with this, and Ken was the first one to come out of the woodwork, and now we have a mailing list of 50 people in the village. So, you know, to tell those stories between different communities would be really powerful, actually. Yeah.
You're on mute, John.
Yeah, that doesn't make sense. I was trying to say, in 20 years' time, you want to look back and think what you've realised, because I think in 20 years' time, everybody will be impacted. What worries me is going to take so long to get through every part of society and make everybody realise what they've got to do, and the urgency that you're conveying, Matt. You know, how many people, what's the tipping point in community between having a meaningful impact and not having a meaningful, and the only way to get there is to try. You can do nothing but try.
Yeah, I really feel like if more people understood the urgency of it, we would overcome so many of our hurdles. I mean, I know, you know, there's massive anxiety about, you know, the decline of the oil and gas industry and everything. But, you know, just look at our community. We have 450 homes in our community. Most of them are in an EPC of D. If we need to retrofit all those homes within 10 years, we need to be retrofitting like 2 or 3 every month. You know, that's permanent labour for 10 years. So we need an army of retrofitters out there, and people can retrain. And yeah.
I get very, Tara always laughs, and Kelly, they always laugh at me. I get very animated, especially when I've had a coffee, and I haven't had a coffee tonight. I can point at the screen and get very excited. Matt, the examples you're bringing to the table, spot on. House ratings, how long would it take just to do Davia area? If I join that dot to Ian, who talked about, I bought a car, but actually, do you know what? I could tell 20 people about what impact that car's had. And then Ken's piece about draft and soya, hadn't heard that before. I come from a farming family, strikes me right at the heart, makes a lot of sense, right? And those distilleries think they're doing the sensible thing. They're being incentivized to do CHP. It's better than them burning diesel, and it's probably better than them burning gas, but the consequences are unintended. And nobody in central government, I can guarantee you there's somebody in Tara's organisation, and there'll be people on our steering group and the NFU team will all know about that issue. But who decides whether it's right or wrong? That, you know, those are the complexities. There's some massive ethical issues coming around the corner as well. Anybody else? Anybody who hasn't said anything yet? Feel free, honestly. But at some point,
I see Martin. I see Martin's got his hand up there. Martin Forster.
Yeah, thank you very much. We all live or most of us live in the Shire, where we have a lot of mileage to do. I am a retiree, but I do 18,000 miles. And I'm sure there's plenty of us in that sort of category doing loads and loads of miles, yet there's not much public transport around for the sort of journeys we want to do. Now, how big an issue is this? If we individually are thinking we need to lower our carbon footprint, what can we do? I have heard maybe incorrect information, but that electric cars, the manufacture of them, and the batteries in particular, are very environmentally unfriendly. This is a two-pronged question.
No, you're absolutely right. And I'm going to do to our Vice Chair Kelly what Sam did to me, and just throw this to Kelly because she actually works for Nestrans and she knows everything there is to know about transport across the region. Not to put too much pressure on you there, Kelly.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I know everything there is to know, but certainly I've got a pretty good background around transport and the environment and how it impacts on climate change. Transport is one of the main emitters of transport. It's around 37% of the total Scottish emissions, so it is a big problem. In terms of proportion, because the electricity has got less, so transport as a proportion has got bigger, but obviously there is a lot to do in terms of making transport cleaner. So there's the decarbonisation side, so looking at cleaner vehicles, whether that's electric or hydrogen. There's issues like what we're doing here, reducing the need to travel, so having more virtual meetings. Do you need to travel? encouraging people for shorter journeys to walk and cycle. There's electric bikes now, which is encouraging people who perhaps weren't quite as fit or couldn't cycle quite as far, the opportunity to use a bike where they may not have been able to use a bike. So there are lots of things that we need to do in terms of mitigation, so reducing our emissions, decarbonising the transport system, which in itself is a massive undertaking, and also adapting the infrastructure as well. So there is lots to do. In terms of electric vehicles, they're getting cleaner and the distances that they can travel are getting better all the time. So I think it's probably one of the previous owners were saying that they've just had an electric vehicle. It's more about telling those stories and how they're getting on with them, and whether that's a decision that you and your family would make in terms of, would an electric vehicle suit us? I think they're the sort of conversations that people need to start to have and start to think about. But absolutely, like everything else with climate change, it's a massive, huge culture change will need to happen at lots of different ways. So at an individual level on how we choose to travel, but also at a national and international level in terms of actually decarbonising the transport in the first place.
Thanks, Kelly. Does that answer your question, Martin?
Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you very much.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, do we have, I see Matt's put something in the chat here about a session on electric vehicles last week. Thank you for that, Matt. That's a good link for everybody to look at as well. Okay, I'm well aware of the time. Do you have any other questions or comments, or maybe something further on what Alice was saying about the personalisation of these kind of things as well? No. Okay, well, if it's okay with Sam, Alice and Kelly, I will let everyone run and be free and enjoy the rest of your Friday night. As I said, tara.murray@aberdeenshire.gov.uk, also Abshire Climate at aberdeenshire.gov.uk. Feel free to drop me an email, get in touch if you'd like to know more about Climate Ready Aberdeenshire, or if you'd like to be involved, or anything related to sustainability that you'd like to know about Aberdeenshire Council as well. I can help you with that as well, and if I don't know, I can find someone who does. So if there's no other questions or comments, thank you so much for joining us, as I said, especially on a Friday night. I hope you've enjoyed Climate Week North East. I hope you've signed up to some of the other events. I'm going to the beach clean on Sunday. I might see some of you there, and hopefully the weather will be quite good. That always makes it a bit more enjoyable. But yeah, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the evening and have a good weekend.
Thank you. Bye.